Well, first of all, welcome to everyone. I'm glad that you've been able to follow all these people that are in the panel now on the Asian Hornet Week, and I hope you've enjoyed the variety of lectures during the week. We've been so fortunate to have people coming in and telling us about situations in Jersey, in Spain. I thank very much Pete for making the time, as he virtually landed in Spain as he was trying to send over his lecture at the same time, I think. And also, we mustn't forget Colette and Rachel for supplying things from Ireland. Alistair Christie, I think, was part of the Irish webinar that we were able to tap into as well, plus John de Cartier as well for all his photographs. And Eleanor, your input into the diet has been superb, so thank you for that. But really, what we wanted to do this evening was for you to have a live session of answering questions. But unfortunately, there's a technical hitch. We're not able to go live and bring in all your questions. We have had questions that have been sent in advance. Some of them are very simple, some of them are much more complex. But I think just before we start, I will say that a very big thank you to everyone that was involved in the One Show. I know that it has made a colossal difference to the workload of the staff in CEH. I'm sure Eleanor, and I'm sure the BBK office has been just swamped with calls going in from people who potentially have seen Hornets. But obviously our Hey Hat teams have been out having a look, and it's been great. The system is working really well. The coordinators know who the nearest person is, and actually the contact system has worked really well. And that's in numerous parts in the country. So there have been people out looking at Hornets, finding wasps, finding nests. We haven't had anything totally confirmed as yet, but it may still happen even before we get off the air, because there's still people out looking at the nests. But without me going on any further, thank you to the panel for being here. Nigel, thank you for giving up your time. Appreciated you kicking off the week as well with your lecture. And Pete as well, obviously. I'm going to ask you some questions now, ask you to do a little bit more. Some of them are very straightforward. We've got Sarah from Bristol. She's asked, is it possible to see just one of these, I think she means Asian Hornets, around? I saw something that looked very familiar in our garden a week or so ago. An elongated, larger wasp is how I described it. Still no idea what it was. Can you give us some idea? Maybe, Nigel, that's something for you to answer, because it's a UK Bristol-based.
Any of us would be happy answering that sort of question. But just going on that brief information that I caught there, I would recommend the user to look at one of the guides that are available. There are many available on the BBK site, on Jersey's site, on our site as well, and to look at the maybe European Hornet, which could have come from that description. It wasn't a very clear one, or maybe a hoverfly. Hornet mimic hoverfly is very common at this time of the year. If you look at our recent article in Beecraft, it shows the common months that these things turn up, and this time of year that is one of the most common. Anyone else want to chip in a little bit, really, or we can cover all species?
The question seemed to be whether it's possible to see one, and the answer is absolutely yes. If this reporter feels that when she does see an Asian Hornet, if she sees an Asian Hornet, she's going to see multiple Asian Hornets, I don't know, 5 or 6 flying around, then she's mistaken. A lot of the nest finding in Jersey starts from a single report. That's all it takes, and then we leap into action.
That
Well,
would be
thank
the
you.
same, I would say, wherever. There is always a single report at the start, and then it increases as you get into the area and start looking around. You know, I'm not seeing the questions up front, so sorry if I didn't catch that, Anne. You may have to go a bit slower so people are aware of where you're coming from on the questions.
One of
Want to see a live one?
well, I was just about to ask Bob whether you could introduce our other guest that's outside your back door at the moment.
Well, if it's still there, hold on.
Okay. We'll just wait for Bob to pop outside. He's got a bait station just outside his back door, so you can guess what the guest outside.
It's getting a bit dark now.
Okay, just give us a quick view of it then, Bobs. Is it there?
It's there, but it's a bit dark. Can you see
We
it?
can see it quite well. Just put it down a bit and to the right a bit. You're right, I think.
Oh.
That's, oh no, the other way. The other way. Bit across a bit more. Perfect. Yeah, we can see that. It's sitting on the top of the wick of the bait station. Feeding there, just ready to go back to its nest. Any comments on that from anyone? About that style of bait nest?
Yeah, he might not have hornets for much longer on his bait station.
I know that.
Because that's one that we believe the nest that we've had a sightings all over the northeast part of our main town, really wide area, and we believe that the nest that was responsible for all these sightings was found yesterday and will be dealt with on Monday afternoon.
Oh, well, that's very current news. Thank you very much, Alistair.
Right. I'm taking it back because she's looking
Bob,
a little
thank you very
worried now.
much.
Now you've said that.
I'm sorry if I've upset her, Bob.
She'll be back.
Just one more thing that's come in, probably quite relevant to this, because I had several reports, and I'm sure most of you have had these reports where people see an insect, but they don't take a photo, or if they do take a photo, it's very blurred. Even if it's of a nest, it's still very difficult to identify. Is there anybody who can give any tips on how to photograph the Asian hornet so that either it or the nest is a little bit clearer?
Oh, God.
I would say don't panic.
Yeah.
Right.
Just, they will not harm you. They are perfectly, they are relatively harmless when they are not near the nest. And so you will have time. So long as it is feeding, you will have time.
So what you're saying is that somebody can film it on a flower or when it's actually foraging, but not get too close to the nest. How fast would you, how near would you say you can go to a nest?
Well, personally, I would say within 2
No,
meters.
not personally, Bob.
No, I'm just saying you can look, you can go within 2 meters of a nest, but the chances of you being that close to a nest are very slim because most of them will be out of reach. So, you know, they won't be somewhere where you can just walk up to them.
Nigel, do you want to come in on that and talk about walking
I
up?
want to come in on earlier bit on that. I think it depends when you weren't specific, and I'm trying now to be very careful as to when this has been seen. So I think it's important to separate, because in the spring, if you see what could potentially be a queen hornet, they will most likely not come back to the same forage source that you're seeing on and can move on because there's only the one individual. So you do, in those circumstances, have to really try to catch it if you can with the net, entomology net, and then just place that into a fridge and freezer and cool it down overnight, and then take the photograph in the morning. If you're convinced it's Asian hornet, you can do the freezer. If you're not convinced and your ID is not good, you can do the fridge, and then it will still be able to release a live animal if you have it in there an hour or two, and then take a photograph with a bit of white paper. That's the best way of doing it. If you're not comfortable doing that, what I'd recommend you do is contact your AHATs, all of which are comfortable doing that, and we'll come out and do that for you. Now, to move to this time of year, if you like, and there's a grey area in between, accepted, but to move this time of year when you're seeing worker hornets coming into and out of gardens, perhaps feeding on apples or on grapes like we've had, or on other fallen fruit, or even on carcasses, then I really, if you see one and it flies off, definitely do not, as Bob said, chase after it or panic or anything like that. I would just watch where you saw it. It's more likely if it's workers, because they're foraging within a kilometre or so, one will come back. We've seen that in the UK on many cases. I know it's the case in Jersey too. Now, it's sort of distance related. So if you're in that band 1 to 2 kms away, and I'm sure this varies country-wise, but in the UK, about 1 to 2 km, you may only get it returning every day or so. So you may have to watch for a while. If you're closer than a couple, 200 to 300 meters, they may return in every couple of minutes. So, that is the best way. And certainly if you're seeing them on fruit, don't panic at all, just wait for the next one to come back. And we've had many photographs sent in from amateur people of when they've got Asian hornets there, which they're a bit blurry around the edges, but you still know it's Asian hornet because it does sit there and they do feed for a while.
Thank you.
Something that flits in and out of the garden, you're better off thinking it's not Asian hornet than it is in the UK. Okay. That may be different in other countries.
Pete, perhaps you could give us an insight into how close you as researchers, and perhaps Eleanor as well, and possibly Alistair, how close you as researchers get to the Asian hornet when you're actually trying to collect your samples, especially if, I don't know if Eleanor, I don't know if you collect them yourself or whether yours come from the nest, but perhaps Pete could tell us the field and you could tell us the what happens more possibly in the lab.
I'm very happy to. I actually also want to give my colleague Thomas the chance, because he was going to come in on the photograph question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let's go back to the photograph first, because I think that's really important.
You might have to come closer.
Yeah, that's fine. Is the audio okay with this?
I think so, yes.
So there's something very basic, which I think, and in fact, we were discussing this earlier, when it comes to photography, especially if people are using their smartphones to do it. If you can get a top-down view where the hornet is against a solid background that's in the same field of vision as the hornet, focus will work a lot better. Whereas if the hornet is against a background that's further away, it will be quite difficult, I think, for most people to get a picture that's in focus.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. Yeah.
And then in regard to how close do we get to hornets when we're doing the research, I mean, we get very close to individuals. I mean, when we're doing the radio tracking, in essence, we are actually sort of handling the hornets. We sort of cold anesthetize them first, so basically put them to sleep. But they obviously wake up within just a very short space of time. When we're still usually finalizing sort of what we're doing. And then when we release them, we sort of release them from the back of a gloved hand, which is obviously something that you can do when you've got that level of experience. But it also demonstrates that a single individual away from the nest is not usually, it's not intent on stinging you. They usually want to just get away and return to the nest. So an individual is not particularly a threat. Obviously, there are always exceptions. You do get cases where people say if they're picking fruit and they accidentally grab a fruit where there's either a wasp or a hornet on it, then obviously it will just try and defend itself. But if you take a photograph, you can get surprisingly close. And it's not a major threat, though obviously if you have any allergies to wasps and hornets or bees, then obviously do stay back from that and ask somebody else to do that for you.
Eleanor, do you actually get involved in the field work as well? Do you have to go and get your samples? I presume you don't have to collect the nest yourself, but
no, Nigel does all of that, thanks very much. So my background is genetics, so I'm I don't think I've ever seen a live hornet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Come and stay with me, Eleanor. I'll show you some.
I'll pop over to the Channel Islands.
We can change that for you, Eleanor, if you wish. Yes.
I mean, I get very close to the Asian hornets. I have been close on the inside of an Asian hornet, but I've never actually seen a live one. And the dead ones don't represent much threat.
No, probably the best way to view them. Alistair, what about you? Because you do a bit of both, don't you? You're looking
Daily, yeah, pretty much daily. Probably not as much as Bob, but at this time of year, pretty much daily. I was monitoring a bait station this afternoon and marking a few hornets and assessing the direction of flight. So no, very close indeed. And I've not as many as Bob, but certainly taken nests out of bramble patches on a few occasions, which is always an exciting exercise.
Do you get teams in to remove the primary nests, or do you do that?
In Jersey, we're doing that within the volunteer group. Primary nests don't normally involve heights, and that's one of our restrictions as a volunteer group to fulfill the the safety requirements of working under a Government of Jersey program. So in bramble patches, for example, provided people are appropriately dressed with sting-proof suits and they know what they're doing, and Bob certainly has got plenty of experience, more than me, then the volunteers will do the primary nest removals. Bob has removed a good number of secondary nests, but increasingly we're bringing the States of Jersey tree surgeons into that program, and they're doing a lot of the secondary nest treatments and removals.
One question I've got here from Martin Wastel, it probably is something that several of you could answer, is what actually happens to all those nests that have been found, whether they've been dissected, but particularly on Jersey, what happens to all those? I know, Alistair, you had a large fridge, but I'm sure you can't get 83 or whatever it was.
The freezer at the moment is pretty full, and so ultimately when we've gathered what we need from them, whether it's samples or a more detailed analysis of for example, the number of combs, the number of cells in each comb, the division between the eggs, the larvae, the pupae, those sorts of things, then ultimately the nests end up in the incinerator. They get pretty smelly, I have to say, after a while. Yeah, all those putrefying larvae. It's not very nice after a while. Yeah.
I think Ellie and myself were racing each other to come in there. Ellie, do you want to go on that being from the lab?
Yes. Yes. So the samples end up at Ferrer, and we store them at -80. But we, for some, we've kept an archive of representative samples, and for others, so we have representative individuals for the nest. And for other nests, we have the entire nest in -80. But if you imagine the size of these nests, we don't have infinite -80 resource. So we don't have all of the nests at -80. But we don't have the number that Jersey have.
No. But we also have We also have photographic records of each comb as well from each one in reports, and details of whether eggs were found, etc., or what numbers of larvae, etc., on each comb. So all of that is detailed and held.
I suppose from UK's point of view, am I right in thinking that by keeping the nests, you can look at the DNA and identify the fact that they're not coming from the same source?
We do that analysis on each nest as it comes in. We're not, so far we have not been inundated with large numbers of nests. So in the year that the nests arrive, we do some form of genetic analysis. We're not able to pinpoint where the nests are from. We can just broadly say from the continental European population. But we have stored the samples, and so with the dietary analysis, because we had those samples in storage, we're able to go back and do further studies on those. And so we try and get as much information as we can at the time, and then we try and store as much sample as we can, so that if future research ideas come up, we can then go back to that nest material and those samples and hopefully answer some of those questions if they come up in the future.
And just to extend on that a little bit, one very important thing, every hornet that is collected initially at the start of an outbreak and during all the track and trace, if hornets are found in traps, you know, a KM away or whatever, all of them are analysed by Ellie and colleagues, and at the end of it, it's all collated together. And in the case in the UK, they've all been shown, all those single hornets around each nest have been shown to come from that nest, which is a very important factor.
I've got another question here, which is saying, are the Asian hornets affected by the diseases that actually affect honeybees, both the foul broods and also some of the major minor diseases that occur? Who wants to answer that?
Not me.
Thanks.
Not my area of expertise.
Has anybody
Well,
looked
to
into it
my
yet?
knowledge, so the important bit here to say, if they were affected by the foul broods at all, there's no brood nest there to maintain it through the winter. You know, certainly on the EFB, no chance of it living through. So to my knowledge, no. That doesn't mean in the laboratory the larvae couldn't be infected, but I don't think there's any example of that in the wild. Pete, you've probably looked at this, Pete? No,
What about your team, Pete? Have they got any input into disease in the Asian hornet?
Pete, can you hear us?
That's pretty.
When I examine nests, I always look for any parasites or things that shouldn't be there. So once we've had mites in a nest, those were in actual fact dust mites when it came down to it. And I always collect any foreign animal or insect or anything from any nest, and those are stored. So spiders or wasps, anything like that that is found within a nest is collected too.
So there's research that's been done on how Asian hornets can pick up certain sort of parasites and diseases from their prey, in particular from honeybees. So in viruses, as an example, have been shown to occur in Asian hornets, and some of the ones that are found are obviously ones prevalent in honeybees. So the natural assumption is that they've been exposed to them when they've been catching and feeding them or macerating them to pass them on to the larvae. But at the moment, we don't really know what sort of effect they are having, if at all, on the hornets. We just know that they can pick them up. That's not actually our research. That's I'm just mentioning some other research that's in the scientific literature.
And nothing relating to the foul broods. The question was on the foul broods, Pete.
No, it was general, actually. Sorry, Nigel. I wanted to know about the minor diseases as well, but interesting about the viruses and passing them on, I suppose. Yeah. Can I ask this other one that's here, which says we've seen very few Asian hornets on the mainland over the last 2 years. Could this be the changes in the weather, be the reason for this? Or is it the changes in traffic, which we think is mainly responsible? Or perhaps some other reason? I think that's something that anyone there can answer, really. Who wants to jump in first?
I think it's multifactorial would be the best way to answer that. So obviously, a lot of the sightings in the past have been ones that come out of back of vehicles and the like that have travelled, or people who have been on holiday. And there's no doubting that the number of people who've been on holiday over the last 2 years or travelled with vehicles to and from mainland Europe has reduced. So that could be a factor. Have we got enough to statistically say that? Well, I'm sure Ellie would tell me no, very clearly at the moment. Also, time will tell, you know, what happens next year or the year after when everything returns to normal, if it does, assuming, and then we'll see from there. Difficult to tell at the moment. Coming back to the weather, I think certainly the weather is a factor. And I think the fact that we've had, in my part of the world here, you know, a late spring and an early autumn environment, and late days will mean that if we did get them here and they had got in a normal time period, they'd be less well established and not as far ahead, and maybe a smaller nest. And that's certainly the case in all the nests we've seen in the UK so far, which have been under that 30 centimetre size, and most of them smaller than that. If you compare them to the size you see, Alistair, which is up to lead you in.
I don't know what the largest we've seen, Bob, is, but yeah, I mean, this year, I suppose sort of medicine ball size is what we're dealing with. We've got one on Monday morning to take out, which is a decent size. Interestingly, not on a single branch, but lots of small, probably no more than 1 centimetre oak branches, and it's got leaves sticking out the nest and everything else. It's quite strange, the positioning of it at the top of a tree. But yeah, that's probably the largest we've found this year. So it'll be interesting to see that one.
They are later this year, I think, personally. They're smaller than in a good summer. But that may be for two reasons. It may be that we caught most of the early queens, and the queens came in later. You can speculate as much as you like, but certainly they are smaller than I have seen in previous years at this time.
Just a general question, probably Alistair or Pete and his team might be able to answer it, which is at what temperature is a larva or the egg of the Asian hornet killed when they go into a freezer? And what is the time scale you need to leave them in there to make sure they're dead?
Can I answer this? I had put a nest in the freezer a couple of weeks ago, thinking that it would be all done and dusted within 2 hours. When I took it out and started warming it up, both the larvae and the pupae were still alive.
Yeah.
You want to throw some more light on that, Pete? What about the ones that you take down or look at, or Alistair?
I don't really actually have that much to add to that, because we've where we've had collected, well, we actually don't collect the nests, but where we've received nests, the adults have been removed from them, and we just collecting the larval samples that we need, and we actually want them alive. So so I've never actually gone to freeze them as such. We sort of dispose of the material, and we do that by freezing, but then we're not looking at how long they stay alive for. So I haven't really got any more to add to that. Sorry.
Yeah. I think from the point of view of examining nests, I think Bob's experience is that, you know, a couple of hours is a little on the short time if you want to be sure that everything inside the nest is dead. Personally, and more normally in Jersey, they would be in a freezer at least overnight, and I don't think we've ever had anything come back from, you know, a sort of 12-hour freezing. I do know that individual hornets, actually, they're remarkably tough. I mean, it's sort of half an hour at minus 15. You know, you thought that would do for them, but they do tend to come round again. They often don't survive, but they do, you know, they are still alive. Yeah, they are remarkably tough, quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
That's quite important for our people who are putting samples into a freezer to keep. You know, if there's something that they've caught.
Yeah, to kill it, you need, you know, a few hours at least. But to chill it down so it's completely immobile for a decent photograph, I mean, half an hour will certainly do that. But it may well start to twitch after a little bit and start to come round. Yeah.
Our protocol is that we freeze them for, I think it's 72 hours, and preferably at minus 80.
Yeah.
The nest,
Oh wow!
I think that's pretty safe.
The nest insulates it very well.
Yes.
We do also use minus 15, but also, so that is, you do need to freeze them for a long time, particularly if it's an entire nest, because the nest is quite thermally insulating.
Yeah.
So a long time, preferably 2 days.
One to do with diet here, which I probably Pete, I don't know if you and your team have been working on diet, so Ellie quite a lot. Is it correct that the diet is different to that when a hornet becomes established than when it's actually looking for a nest to actually move from its primary nest to its secondary nest? Is it different in that it, I think they're asking, is it different according to the number and amount of different insects about? And does it tend to site its nest near some tasty feasts like honeybees and their hives and colonies? Pete, do you have anything to say on that?
I can sort of come in a little bit on that, but I imagine Eleanor could also comment on the diet analysis that they have done as well. So when obviously the fauna that exists for the hornets to prey on will change over the season. So we do anticipate that because the hornets are opportunistic in terms of what they feed on, we do anticipate that their diet changes. But that's very much also part of the research that we are actually trying to gather the data to potentially demonstrate that. So we're not in a position to categorically say that happens, but it's a reasonable assumption. Then in regard to where they are siting their nests, I mean, the primary nest is usually set up by the founding queen early in the spring, and usually in a sheltered location. And obviously the food that it's available later in the season will be very hard to predict at that point in time. But the secondary nest is usually then within 100 meters or so of that primary nest. So actually, I don't think that the hornets are sort of planning that far in advance in terms of what is going to be available to them in late summer. So I think the nests pop up pretty much everywhere, but obviously how good a diet the colony is receiving will influence how well that colony will grow. So if it's a poor site, it'll probably be a smaller nest, whereas in an optimum location, you'll get the bigger nests and obviously the large numbers of hornets then in those locations.
Do you want to comment on diet, Eleanor?
I was just going to say that our study is taken from that snapshot when the nest has been destroyed. So we don't have a time series. To be able to say whether the diet changes through the season, we'd maybe need to be able to catch them very early. So Nigel, if you could catch us a few when they're really beginning in spring, that would be great. My diet study doesn't inform about that. We can see that the diet's not the same everywhere, so we can hypothesize that they're generalists. From papers I've read that the queen is more cautious in the prey she will take early on in the season.
Makes sense.
But that's just from something I've read rather than from anything I've studied.
Thank you. One here, which is probably quite a general one. Is it correct to say that when the Asian hornet becomes well established, it will have a major effect on the pollination of not just the area, but within the country? I'm thinking in terms of maybe extending that to say, do you think it's more economically, it will be more damaging in Europe than in the UK?
I didn't catch who the question was addressed at.
I think it must be you, Pete.
No,
You
sorry.
have more
I
experience
think
than
Pete, it's whoever's in Spain at the moment would be a good person to actually speak on that.
So it's a very difficult question really to answer, because the data is not really available yet. Again, we are sort of as part of the work that we're doing, and also in collaboration with the Atlantic Positive Project, are looking at the sort of wider impact of the hornets, not just on honeybees, but also on other pollinators, whether that's a direct impact or whether that's an indirect impact, because it's not just the hornets feeding on pollinators, it's even changing the behavior of the pollinators can obviously have an effect. So Sandra Rogers, who's here, she's published a study which looked at the pollination of mint, where hornets were influencing the behavior of pollinators. And she has found a reduction in the number of pollen that end up on the stigma. So that's one piece of evidence towards that. I don't know, Sandra, do you want to say any more on that study?
No, you just explained it very well. Hornets hunt also in flowers. So they change the number of pollinators and their behavior. Also, when they try to take them and escape, they just leave the flowers and leave the flowers without pollen. So pollination is being affected. So they are directly influencing the position of pollen on stigmas. And with that, all the chain of pollination, seed production, and population of plants can be affected. Then it is a longer effect on the environment, on the ecosystems made by the hornets preying on pollinators.
But we do still, I mean, maybe it's because we're scientists, but we do have to be a little bit cautious. It's obviously, it provides an answer that's towards answering the question, but it's also on the, one has to consider the scale of things. So whether hornets will change pollination service on a national scale, we obviously need to do further studies to really be able to answer that. But by collecting this evidence piece by piece and putting it all together, hopefully that will eventually be able to answer that sort of question.
Thank you. Alistair, can you give us any idea on how the hornets, because you've got quite a lot in Jersey now, have actually affected the honeybee production colonies in Jersey?
Pretty much not at all. Yeah, pretty much not at all. I just add to Pete's sort of answer actually on that, is that obviously Jersey and mainland UK is very different from what's going on in Spain. What we don't want to be in a position of ever finding out is, you know, what does happen when you've got an uncontrolled population of Asian hornets. You know, we never want to be in that position at all, and that's why we're all doing so much work to protect our borders and control the hornets that we have in Jersey. You know, when you find evidence of them in the UK, you leap into action very quickly indeed, and have been very successful. Just moving back to honeybee colonies, I mean, I think this year we've had 5 instances of hawking at beehives, I think it is. Nothing, I don't think any of them have been more than a single hornet. And we've, I think there were actually 2 of them were still working on finding nests. But one situation, at one apiary, the hornet, he killed the hornet and he's not seen another one. So we're a little puzzled by that one. And in another situation, I suspect, I'm just not being told how much hawking is going on and how kind of sustained it is. But we're working on tracking that nest at the moment. But, you know, there is this kind of feeling that you've got Asian hornets, it's wiping out honeybee colonies all over the place. And the situation that you hear about in France is certainly utterly odds with what we've got in Jersey. I'm not saying there hasn't been some impact, but we leap into action pretty promptly to try and find the nests in Jersey to protect those honeybee colonies. There's no evidence we've ever lost a colony in Jersey to Asian hornets, none whatsoever.
That's
Can
really
I
good
refer
news.
back to the previous question, which links in with this one?
Certainly,
When Kirsty was here Kirsty Stainton was here last week, she talked to us about some research that she'd done into the prey species of the Asian hornet. I think it's linked in with Peter now, working with DNA of the gut.
And Eleanor, of course.
Hello, Eleanor. Sorry.
So just Kirsty's a co-author on the study we did. So
Okay, sorry. I'm only mine's more from the horse's mouth.
yeah. So yeah, well, there's two.
If you're listening, Kirsty, I apologise for that.
two-horse race, yes.
But the findings were, I think you can support me or not on this, Eleanor, is that the majority of the prey species was mainly flies. And we always ignore flies in their value as pollinators, but of course they are incredibly useful pollinators.
Well, so we joined our study up with Kirsty. So Kirsty had the Jersey hornet, and then she's working with us on the ones where we have the Tetbury and Woolacombe, and we're finding a diversity. So wasps was a major item. So
right.
But also dung flies, it's not just pollinators.
No.
Dung flies was, quite a lot of stuff weren't pollinators.
Yeah.
But then obviously we have to caveat that, and by saying that these are mostly nests that have been found on their own in a landscape where there's no competition with other Asian hornets.
Thank you. Can
I could maybe just add that there's actually also the French work that's been done. So that's in areas where the hornets are sort of well established, and even they found that. I mean, we always focus on that honeybees can sort of form sort of like a third of their diet in some habitats, even more than that. But they equally found that wasps and flies sort of made up the majority of the other 2/3. So they are a very important part of the diet. But it's also very location dependent. So they are such opportunistic feeders that if they were in an area where there's no honeybees about, they will very readily just feed on what else is available.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's quite helpful. Just as a sort of final thing to ask you, is there any particular thing that you would say to people over here in the UK that are trying to actually keep the numbers of hornets down as far as possible? Well, actually, I'll ask a double question. What is the best bait for the UK to be using? And secondly, what is the main message that we need to get out there about the Asian hornet, and to whom do we need to give it? Is it something that needs to be on the media more, on things like the One Show more? So a question, maybe we could start with Eleanor. I don't know if this is an area you have any sort of input into from your labs, but you probably have your own opinion anyway, and what's coming through your research. So yeah,
I will slide over baits. I have no comment to make on that one. But in terms of the main message, well, at the moment is about vigilance, and that is aimed at beekeepers, but also the general public.
Yeah.
If we move into if the circumstances change, that may not be the main. There may be other bits that we want people to take on board, but I would say at the moment it's about vigilance, finding these things early, ensuring that we keep them out, and we can track down those nests as quickly as possible.
Pete, do you want to come in next? And we'll go along the bottom. Oh, I don't know. Your screen's probably different than mine. Sorry. Pete and your team.
Sorry, I was slightly distracted with the conversation here, but I would definitely sort of agree with Eleanor that vigilance is a really important aspect. I mean, one shouldn't just focus on traps and attractants, because really I think everybody needs to be used to looking pretty much anywhere and suspecting that there might be an Asian hornet around, because they have been seen even on a pavement where you probably wouldn't expect them. I believe in Jersey, somebody reported a hornet on a motorbike, a seat, on flowers, around rubbish. They can be in various locations. So if I think my main message is to obviously use traps where that is appropriate, but to not just think about looking at the traps, but looking elsewhere. There is, as part of the Atlantic Positive project, there is actually some work going on evaluating different attractants. That work is still ongoing, so it's not at a point where actually any sort of initial results can be shared. But obviously people have experience both in Jersey and in the UK in terms of what works there. What is a little bit interesting is from my own experience from traveling around, is that different locations are using different attractants, but they are working there. And then when you suggest sort of what somebody else has been using elsewhere and they try that, it doesn't always work in that particular country. So here in Galicia, something that we've been using a lot is chicken legs, sort of bought from a supermarket, hung up by a piece of string in a tree. Seems to work very well with attractants. I bought some trappet sort of along to try and sort of put nearby to sort of see if there was any interest in that. So far, I haven't actually had a hornet come to the trappet. Yes, in Jersey, it's one of the most successful things. So it is, there are obviously locational differences as well. I mean, obviously, Nigel has huge experience in terms of what has worked in the UK so far, and one should definitely take that into account. But equally, as results are coming out, then obviously those will be shared and will be then evaluated in those localities then.
Do you have a time scale for any results, Pete?
I have to look to my colleague, Sandra. Do you have a time frame on the when results are coming out on the attractants, the comparison of them?
We are in the laboratory analysis part of this research, and we are now focusing on radio tracking and testing some effects on colonies. So we stopped that work to do field work.
Yeah.
We are 3 people working and so many things to do. So I expect this year we're going to have results for the chemical part.
Thank you. Alistair, do you want to say what you're using in Jersey and what's effective? Maybe you.
We're still using Trap-It in Jersey, and I mean, largely it works. It's also readily available and conveniently packaged and everything else. But I think, I mean, Bob might back me up on this one. I think sometimes in most seasons, there have been times in the season, and I'm not sure we can particularly pin it down to a particular time, but we've sort of scratched our heads and wondered whether it is working in the season. But overall, Trap-It has been the one that works for us. Bob is doing some attractant work and testing a few things. Don't quite know what, but we have tried protein from, I think, chicken to prawns. One of our trackers was using dog food a few days ago, and there was no interest at all. So, you know, we continue to use, sorry?
Apart from the dog.
Apart from the dog. But, you know, so we continue to use Trap-It. And I mean, at the moment, it seems to be working well, not displeased with it. One little tip, actually, a method that, again, thanks to Bob for his lateral thinking on all sorts of sort of issues to do with hornets. He was trying a couple of years ago, but has now been, picked up by a number of our other trackers. Is if you need to get a good sort of scent attractant plume out there, a decent pressured aerosol sort of sprayer from the garden centre seems to really work wonders. And a number of our trackers are carrying these things around that you can pump up, these one litre garden centre sort of insecticide sprayers, and you give it a good sort of squirt around the area where you're going to set your bait station up. And I understand it brings hornets in very quickly indeed. You don't have to wait long at all. Bob, I'm sure, will say some more on that.
Do you want to come in on that, Bob? Because it seems.
Yeah, I've been doing that for 2 or 3 years now. Also, heating it up brings them in quite quickly. But the aerosol is very efficient in an area where you suspect there are hornets. You can get hornets coming into your spray within seconds, which is quite remarkable. Yes, I'm using the Trap-It, but I'm also I had some success this week with an apple jelly and vinegar mix. So that's the apple jelly as a jam. My apple jelly is made with golden hornet apples and Japanese quince. So I thought I'd make them feel at home.
Thank you, Bob. Yes. Nigel, do you want to say something about what is possibly?
Yeah, much the same message, I think, from everyone here, but I'll just put in a few asides, what the inspectors have found in the field. So we now use Trap-It as well in the main. It's really convenient, as has been said. It comes very easy to use. And it is effective. We've used Vita Pharma in the past, the one available from Thorns. Again, it worked less convenient to use in the field, but it does work as well. We've had Asian hornets caught in many homemade mixtures out there, from the simple apple juice with sugar added to it through all sorts of beer concoctions, mostly sweetened. Not by ourselves, but by beekeepers in the areas when they've been doing it around the outbreaks, all of which have worked. My message would be, if you want to try out things, if it attracts wasps in, you're likely to get Asian hornets on it. So this time of year, just try one of the commercial baits or something you make up yourself or heard about. But if it attracts wasps, if Asian hornets are in the area too, remember, they're not just necessarily coming there for the sweet bait. They may be coming to collect a handy meat package that's at your sweet bait, so to collect the wasp. And on that note, if you're putting up these sort of bait stations or the like, which is what we're all moving towards, these wick type bait stations, I would suggest putting them up near the ivy at the moment. And we went back to not just thinking about trapping, and which was mentioned by Pete and others earlier on in this conversation. That's a very important point. Look at ivy at this time of year. Down my way, we've got Colites hedera all over them. We know Asian hornets collect that. I've seen it. They also collect the honeybees there. They're also there to collect nectar as well. So I would recommend looking at the ivy very much, and any other flowering plants at the moment. But the ivy is a real attractant, certainly from now on in the UK.
There's an autumn flowering camellia that we've found very attractive in Jersey, and we've got a number of householders who've got these in their gardens, and they're sort of natural sentinel monitoring stations, and they know my number to call if they see anything out there.
I think having the national collection of camellias at the zoo helps you with that one a little bit.
Yeah, possibly. But, I mean, you were talking about awareness and beekeepers. Yes. I mean, there beekeepers are very focused in, and I'm sure you've heard, particularly John de Carteret say on our social media page that almost all reports of Asian hornets do not come from beekeepers,
Yeah.
but they are a convenient group of people to engage with. And of course, they have a vested interest in being engaged with and recognizing Asian hornets and reporting them. But I suppose that's sort of a narrow market, if you like. Having a national message, I mean, my feeling is it always seems to get lost in the sort of murder hornet Armageddon story. And I think the one show, it's not the first time, but it was nice to see a fairly sort of steady, sensible message. It didn't quite go according to plan. Apparently a minute was cut off it because of a tennis player whose name I can't pronounce. And the bit that was cut off was actually the ID side of things and how to report, arguably the most important part of the article. But they did refer, off the one show, they have referred to the BBK Asian Hornet page, which is very effective indeed. But, you know, it wasn't perfect. But I wonder, just talking about plants, whether there aren't other groups that you can sort of explore engaging with, perhaps gardening groups, and make them aware. They're outdoors. Many of them will have these sort of flowers in their garden, recognize those flowers. You know, what grows in Jersey is different from what grows in a lot of the UK. I mean, we have, you know, gardens with banana plants in, and we know also hornets are attracted to those. I've never seen them on echiums, but there are plenty of bees and other wildlife on echiums. But we do have a list of sort of sentinel plants, and it may be a sort of route into another broad group of people that you know, tend to be sort of quite sensible and can probably receive and take on board an awareness message. And there may be others as well.
I have one further thing to say, and that is about oak trees.
Yeah, there's
Oak trees that are infested with the goat moth and other boring insects produce a sticky sap, which is highly attractive to all wasps, hornets, European hornets, Asian hornets, and butterflies. And that is one of my choices of the best sentinel plants, because they are exuding the sap from June until now. If there are hornets about, they will visit those trees. I call them the magic trees, because I use them all the time I walk past them just to check to see whether there's anything on them. You know, this week I've seen hornets on them, European and Asian, but innumerable red admirals. You know, you can have a great shower of red admirals and you know you're onto a magic tree.
I'm gonna have an
idea.
Oh, sorry, we're all launching in, but can I just follow that up with what happened at Tetbury? Again, it proves the point of the general public, and I think the point Anne has made before about youngsters being key in this awareness. One of the schools nearby regularly reported Asian hornets, shall we say, during the outbreak. They were visited on a number of times, and Asian hornets were not seen. There were hornets, European, and many wasps visiting willow trees, which were covered in
willow trees too.
With the honeydew coming from the aphids. Now, whether or not the hornets were collecting the honeydew or collecting the aphids or collecting the wasps, who will only know? I'll leave Ellie to work that out with DNA.
I would say the honeydew, because I've been watching a plant in Jersey that's absolutely covered. I mean, there must have been 20 Asian hornets around it, and
interesting.
I observed them collecting the honeydew.
Yeah, and so that proved key to us, and eventually we saw Asian hornets on that, and that was very close to the nest site. So that answers a number of key points there.
One thing that I feel important to add here as well, as I don't believe it's been mentioned, but given the time of year, fallen fruit is highly attractive to wasps and hornets. And in fact, I think in the UK, some of the sightings that led to nests have started from sightings on fallen fruit.
A great majority.
And actually, earlier today, as part of the work that we're doing, I have to sort of collect hornets, and probably it was amazingly quick just by going to some fallen fruit.
On that point, the new fact sheet that's been released as part of this Asian Hornet Week from the MBU has that point in it about the fallen fruit, apples, pears, etc. All of which we've seen Asian hornets on in the outbreaks in the UK.
And my plum puree didn't work
last year.
Oh. Has anybody any other sort of tips that they want to put to the people watching, rather than just sort of pointing them to literature? Is there anything else you want to add that you feel is really important to get over to our beekeepers and the public that may be watching at the moment?
I just wanted to we had to have one clear message, but a secondary message is about biosecurity and the importance of not bringing things into the country, being cautious about your luggage as you come in and out of the country, be cautious about the things you bring in. So that message, I think, is very important that the whole British public take on board. And the best way to message that is around departure points and entry points.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is a very important point. Right. Well, can I just say a huge thank you? You've given up a lot of time. You've lectured, you've answered questions, you've been absolutely superb with contributing to the Asian Hornet Week. I hope that what you've actually contributed, we can, over here in the UK, and the BBK especially, can take that message, as you said, much, much wider. We need to get it out to the public, and we need to reinforce it. As we all know, if you tell somebody something once, they've forgotten it by the time you finish your sentence. So it's a case of, yes, we did do all the postering last year. We have to do it again, and we have to be ready in the spring to actually reinforce it again. Our spring conference is on the 5th of February, and that is going to be quite a different experience, I hope. It's going to be very much more research-based, with people actually perhaps bringing in some of the results from their research from different areas and different countries. Ongoing in the Asian Hornet Week, obviously the YouTube channel will have the talks that have been given. They're staying up there so that they can be called up and looked at again by people who haven't quite had time to actually sit down and really take it in. They might have just glanced at something, but it would be great. And I think that your work in what you've put in this week is very much appreciated. So thank you to all of you. And to the people who are not with us tonight, Colette and Rachel obviously couldn't come in. And I think there must be a special thanks as well to John Le Cartre for all his photography and his inputs over social media. I think we can learn a lot from what goes on in different areas, and we can actually enhance what we do by listening to what other people in other countries and other places are doing. So it is very valuable. A final thank you to Farah and what they've done, and thank you, Nigel, for organising a lot of that. Becky Clark was very positive in her input, and Diane Roberts for helping with the actual social media. But a special thank you for Diane Drinkwater for what she's been doing in contacting you and bringing in the links and putting it all together. Do appreciate your time very much indeed. And I think the message that certainly we can go away with is, please, be vigilant. Don't be complacent. These insects can appear anywhere. So look for the unexpected, really. So thank you very much indeed. I very much appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody who sees this next week will be very grateful as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne, for hosting the
Thanks,
event.
And thanks for hosting.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
As I said, be in touch again. So take care. Bye.
Night all.
Bye.
Bye.